Welcome to the Stowe Curtain Podcast. It's Sunday, September 14th, and the Pittsburgh Steelers are 1-1 after a 31-17 home loss to the Seattle Seahawks at Acrisure Stadium just now in week 2 of the NFL season. I'm Josh Yourish, and today I'm solo again. Mark Powell, my co-host for these instant reaction shows, is away in Italy on his honeymoon, enjoying maybe an Aperol Spritz, maybe, a little late there, a bottle of wine, and not likely subjecting himself to that sloppy mess that the Steelers submitted in week 2. So I'm going to bring you my instant reaction to all of it. And my initial takeaway, I was very intentional not to overreact to the week 1 result against the Jets. Aaron Rodgers throws 4 touchdowns. Rodgers is back, baby. I was very much pushing against that narrative that I knew was going to come out of that game because I just didn't see it in that performance. I think this is a lot more of what Aaron Rodgers is going to look like this season against Mike Macdonald, who I think is one of the best defensive minds in the NFL. But before I get to my weekly Rodgers report in these instant reactions, and maybe even a look at the defense, we got to start on the special teams. Last week, it was Kenneth Gainwell punching a ball out on a kickoff that the Steelers recovered, turned into a touchdown, and then it was a Boswell 60-yard game-winning field goal. The Steelers love to, play 3 phases of the game, win close games with special teams and turnovers. They got the turnovers today. That was the only way they were really getting off the field defensively, was forcing some turnovers. And you saw at the end, they had to get really aggressive defensively to try to do that. Some of it worked, some of it didn't. But on special teams, the big mistake came courtesy of rookie running back Caleb Johnson in the return game. He missed the new landing zone kickoff is a bit confusing for everyone. It shouldn't be confusing for Caleb Johnson. He didn't field the kickoff from Jason Myers on the fly, which is exactly what teams are trying to do. Get a kind of a muddy kickoff, right? Like you want it to land in that landing zone and then bounce either into the end zone or to a returner to delay their start, to let you, beat some of the blockers. And Johnson had it sail over his head, wasn't able to make the grab, and it was still a live ball. It rolled into the end zone, but not out of the end zone. Had it rolled out of the end zone, it would have been a touchback at the 20-yard line instead of a touchback at the 35-yard line, which is what happens if you kick it out of the end zone with this new kickoff format, which I'm lukewarm on. I generally like it. If it's going to make the game safer and produce more returns, I think that's great. I don't love a touchback being at the 35-yard line. I think that's a bit extreme, but that's how you facilitate more returns. And Johnson just gave up on it when it went over his head and into the end zone. It was not whistled dead for a touchback when it bounded into the end zone. That was still a live football. The Seahawks recovered for a touchdown. It was the first touchdown scored by a kicking team in the NFL since 1981. An absolute disaster. And Danny Smith, maybe he's not going to let himself have an extra piece of gum this week after that performance by his unit. And it's really just, it's a blunder by one player. It's not on Danny Smith, but it's a disastrous mistake. And in my opinion, it is something of a reflection of this team being relatively poorly coached. And I imagine we're not going to see Caleb Johnson very much for at least a little while. He's been on ice to start the season in general, especially at the running back position. Now he was not out there to return the ensuing kickoff, which I think was a good decision because you don't know what kind of mindset a player like that is going to be in after a mistake like that. Kenneth Gainwell, of course, did nothing with that return because Kenneth Gainwell does nothing with any time he touches the football, any opportunity he has with the football in his hands. He's just not a very dynamic player. But they continue to run him out there over Caleb Johnson, which I think is a massive mistake offensively. If Johnson's going to do that on special teams, you can't really have him returning kicks anymore. He fumbled a kick return last week as well. So just not a good start to this experiment with Johnson as the kick returner. But that's just one mistake, right? The game doesn't boil down to just that play. That play certainly helped Seattle. But there's a lot more for us to dig into today. I'm going to start with the defense. I'm tempted to not take a victory lap on the Aaron Rodgers thing, but this is, again, just what I expected it to look like. And to me, to my eye, this is what it actually did look like last week, right? There were a couple schemed up bootleg play action shots and a pop pass that turned into 4 touchdowns. On the other dropbacks, the typical straight dropbacks, it was a lot of underneath stuff. I'm going to get into it later. Defensively, the Steelers came into this game without Joey Porter Jr. and Deshaun Elliott. Those are very big losses, especially the Elliott loss at a position that the Steelers can't afford to be without one of their starters after trading away Minkah Fitzpatrick for Jalen Ramsey before the season began. So you got Juan Thornhill and Chuck Clark taking nearly all of the snaps at safety. We saw Jabril Peppers, who the Steelers signed this week after the Elliott injury, a bit on special teams. I didn't really, I'm not charting all the snap counts, but I didn't see him out there much, if at all, on the defensive side of the ball. And that's understandable, trying to get up to speed with this scheme. But it's a scheme that's very basic. And Clint Kubiak, the offensive coordinator for the Seattle Seahawks, put that on display. The Steelers play the most cover 3 in the NFL. That has been the case for quite a while. Mike Tomlin, Terrell Austin are very stubborn with this. Cover 3 was the in vogue style 10 years ago, defensive ethos 10 years ago. It is no longer. It has been phased out for good reason. And it just gave so much. What Clint Kubiak, who's off the Shanahan tree, right? Gary Kubiak was, a longtime Shanahan assistant and ran this offense very well. Think back to Matt Schaub, Arian Foster Houston days, right? Clint Kubiak was with Seattle or with New Orleans last year, and they had a really historic start to the season before the offensive line crumbled, Derek Carr injuries and whatnot. But it's the general stuff. It's a lot of what Arthur Smith wants to do. It's wide zone running and play action off of it and attacking the middle of the field. Cover 3 is incredibly susceptible to that, right? You want to attack the seams, you want to attack slants, you want to attack stuff over the middle, and especially when the Steelers linebackers, Patrick Queen, I thought played really well in the run game today, and Peyton Wilson as a pass rusher made a big impact. So that group was much improved from last week when I thought they were either invisible or just flat out bad when you did notice them in week 1. In week 2, I thought the linebacking group was better, but in coverage, they're still a mess. They don't get nearly enough depth. And you saw, think back to a number of times when Darnold's coming off that play action, hitting that 5-step drop, and by the time he's on his back foot, he's firing one past their ear hole on a dig to Cooper Kupp, on a dig to Jackson Smith and Jigba. He hit a lot of slants and seams and stuff today because that's just, everyone knows how to beat cover 3. And if you're going to be so stubborn with it, a quarterback like Sam Darnold, who is not one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, but who has been around for a while with a lot of really good coaches, Kyle Shanahan to Kevin O'Connell, and now to Clint Kubiak, who really good maybe isn't the right way to describe Clint Kubiak, but a play caller who knows what he's doing, has a lot of experience running similar stuff. Darnold's just going to beat you. Joe Flacco carved this defense last year for similar reasons, because veteran quarterbacks just know where the answers are. They have the answers to the test. And that's what it looked like all day for the Seattle offense. Take a look at some of the numbers, because 31-17 shows a lopsided result on the field. Some of that, right, comes back to the Caleb Johnson botched kickoff return and the ensuing touchdown. But in terms of total yards, 395 total yards for the Seahawks in this one. 12 drives both sides, and the Steelers finished with 267. Some of that off of short fields from turnovers, but the Seattle offense was much more effective. 6.2 yards per play to 4.5 for the Steelers, and yards per attempt in the passing game for Sam Darnold, 7.9 to 5.1 for Aaron Rodgers. I just thought they were thoroughly outplayed offensive. The Seattle offense thoroughly outplayed the Steelers offense in this one. And the Steelers defense is a big reason for that, both schematically and because this is a defense constructed of 30-plus-year-old players. And that performance is coming on the heels of a game when the Steelers allowed 394 yards to the Jets, 6.4 yards per play. So through 2 games, the Steelers defense is allowing an average of 394 and a half yards per game, which is just exactly what you saw in the playoff game against the Baltimore Ravens. Only it's not the Baltimore Ravens. It's the Seahawks with Sam Darnold and the Jets with Justin Fields. Two, like, if you want to call them washout quarterbacks, fine. Darnold has had a revitalization. Fields looked like he was going to. He led NFL quarterbacks in success rate last week. And then the Jets got pounded by the Bills today. It was 30-3 last time I checked. I'm not sure what that, it finished a 30-10 final. The Jets are not a good team, and the Steelers narrowly squeaked by in that one. I don't think the Seahawks are necessarily an NFC contender or anything like that. Darnold is a competent quarterback, but he's not an upper echelon guy, right? I want to take a look at the chat as I got derailed taking a look at the chat, and I just really appreciate this from John Edborg. This podcast was realistic this past offseason. That's why I'm still with it. So many others sell false hope and bullshit for cash. Not going to be selling any false hope. I've been very realistic, and you could even say I've been pessimistic about this team, and I continue to be because I just don't think the construction defensively makes a whole lot of sense in a young man's league, especially on that side of the ball. You saw the other oldest defense in the NFL on Thursday night get carved by the Packers. That's the Washington Commanders. Defense is a young man's game, right? It's so reactionary. And in the secondary, the Steelers, obviously, as I mentioned, started without JPJ and Elliott, lost Alex Highsmith, Loudermilk, and Patrick Queen. Queen eventually returned. So a lot of injuries, and that is real. Like, that's a real concern. But in the secondary, nobody is scared of Jalen Ramsey and Darius Slay. 5 years ago, they would have been terrified of that duo. Nobody is scared of them. The first touchdown of the game for Seattle just got man coverage. Torrey Horton, a rookie, his first NFL catch is a touchdown because he just wins a foot race against Jalen Ramsey. And Ramsey atoned for it, undercutting a pretty poor Darnold pass, undercutting Cooper Kupp for that interception on the next drive. I think that was just a bad throw. Like, Kupp had him beat. Ramsey was afraid he was going to get beat on the same crosser. So he was trying to cover up for that by anticipating it, got beat, had to take the risky play and undercut it. It ultimately resulted in an interception because I don't think Darnold put a very good throw on that ball. But Kupp was open. And then you saw it late in the game, right? Sam Darnold needs to ice the game. The Seahawks have been running the ball pretty effectively generally, especially when they get to the perimeter. And that's how they did ice the game, because they're daring the Steelers 30-plus-year-old defensive backs to tackle, and they just can't do it. But you saw Jackson Smith and Jigba taking Ramsey deep one-on-one and winning. And last week we saw Garrett Wilson do the same on a deep crosser against Darius Slay. Those guys are old cornerbacks. You're not going to consistently win with players that age at that position. There's a reason that position is one of the youngest across the NFL. It's so difficult to play. The athleticism is so important in the secondary. Safety, you can get by a little bit with, reading and being one step ahead mentally. Linebacker, certainly you can age more gracefully at that position because of, smarts and knowing where to go. And that's why you see a lot of older linebackers hang on much longer. Bobby Wagner still doing it with Washington. But at cornerback, that's just one-on-one athleticism stuff. And Ramsey still has the length and the strength to make some big hits, dislodge the football. Every once in a while you see flashes, but ultimately he's a 30-plus-year-old cornerback, and those guys are going to get beat. And play callers are not afraid of them. Play callers know how to attack the Steelers cover 3, because to win with cover 3, you have to be like the Seahawks, right? The Seahawks that, really with Dan Quinn and Pete Carroll, obviously the 2013 team, Legion of Boom, like they're the ones that really proliferated cover three. Cover three had obviously been around, but that became the in vogue style. Now it's two high shells and a lot of match quarters stuff. Vic Fangio kind of ball. But when it was cover three, that worked because they had really talented, really long and physical corners. And the Steelers have, name recognition at corner. They have the length maybe to do it, but you have to be just supremely, supremely talented. And I don't think that unit is anymore. So I'm concerned about the secondary the most, but the defensive line doesn't look a whole lot better either. TJ Watt, I've been begging the Steelers to move him around more. I've been begging the Steelers to use more diverse looks along the defensive line to try to get TJ Watt better matchups and not be chipped so often. And they did that some. They moved him around some. They used stunts and twists more often today, which I liked and actually worked fairly well. I've been pleading for it. So obviously, I'm going to be happy when they actually do it a little bit. And they especially did it early in the game before Highsmith went out with that injury. They had a kind of NASCAR pass rush package out there with Highsmith, Herbig, and Watt on the field with Hayward, which I just loved, right? Get your best players out there on 3rd and long. But there were so many 3rd and longs where they weren't getting pressure and where Darnold was, he knows where the answers are against that cover three over the middle, and he continually connected on them. Seattle finished 6 for 14 on 3rd down, 1 for 2 on 4th down. That's not like unreal efficiency, but that's a pretty good mark, especially when they were in 3rd and long, 3rd and pass specifically so often. It was a really bad performance by the secondary, and I think a pretty questionable performance by the defensive line. Hayward had the splash play breaking through unblocked. I thought Seattle had a lot of protection breakdowns in the second half, especially because the Steelers just got super aggressive. On the last drive, they had 3 down linemen and 3 outside linebackers on the field at the same time, like a 6 down front to try to take away the outside zone stuff and dare Seattle to throw the ball. And when they did, they still connected on it. Hayward, as I mentioned, had the splash play, forced the turnover, the Nick Herbig interception that Hayward batted up in the air. That's a bad play by Darnold. And a miscommunication up front that allowed Hayward to break through unblocked. I don't see him consistently winning as a pass rusher. I don't see him anchoring and holding at the point of attack in the run game. I sure as shit don't see Keanu Benton doing that. Benton is a big problem. He's somebody coming into the year. Well, we'll backtrack even a little more. Like, if his rookie season was really promising and he looked like a penetrator on the interior, could play the nose and the 3-tech, but you want him as a defensive end more than you want him as a nose. But promising, a potential disruptor, a potential Cam Hayward running mate, and maybe the guy who takes over that role once Hayward finally ages out. That's how you felt heading into last season with Benton. And then Benton plays a lot of nose last season, which has been a hobby horse for a while for Tommy Jagai and Shane Kubis on our Wednesday show about Benton's just playing the wrong position. And I completely agree. So I've hopped on the bandwagon with them because it's just objectively true, an objectively true observation. He doesn't win. He can't beat double teams. He can't hold up against double teams. He can't hold up against centers flat out. I don't think he's strong enough to do that. He needs to be in a different system or playing defensive end much more because I think he just gets washed out in the run game far too often. And there was one play where Patrick Queen, who again had a really nice game as a run defender specifically, knifed through and made a tackle, made a run stop for, no gain or gain of 1 or something. And Benton had gotten completely washed out of the play by, I believe it was Gray Zabel, but it might have been their starting center. who's also from North Dakota State. And Mark Sanchez made a comment about how that's Benton occupying blockers and allowing his linebackers to run free. And yes, sort of, but he was only occupied because he had been washed out 3 yards down the field. And there was a big lane there. Queen was just quick to fill it and bring Walker down. You want your defensive linemen to occupy blockers like that, leave your linebackers free to play fast and downhill, but not because they're getting washed out, because they're holding the point of attack, because they're occupying double teams, especially at the nose. And Benton just doesn't do that. At the end of the game, they started to play Daniel Akwale more. He looked fairly good. Y.A. Black came in and played the nose more. Black started at defensive end, but he started to play the nose a little more. There were even some reps when Benton, Hayward, and Black were all out there, Steelers base with 3 defensive linemen, and Black was playing the nose and Benton was playing the defensive end spot, which I loved. Like, that's what the ideal setup on the interior of the defensive line is for the Steelers as the roster is currently constructed and until Derek Harmon gets back and healthy. So I thought those reps were better, but Benton is a problem in the run game. Logan Lee is a problem in the run game. Isaiah Loudermilk, before he got hurt, was a problem again in the run game after he was just a complete disaster in week 1. Cam Hayward can't do this all by himself. And I feel like he's been trying to for years. And now age is finally catching up to him after he didn't practice much at all, if at all, in training camp, holding in, trying to get more money. And he got it in the form of playoff incentives. Right now, this defense to me looks like a bottom 10 unit in the NFL. And I don't see any way that the Steelers defense being a bottom 10 unit in the NFL, allowing, again, 394.5 yards on average through 2 weeks, could possibly take this team to the playoffs. I don't see a world where it can happen if the defense continues to play like this. And I don't see much of a world where things can get a whole lot better. Yes, injuries are a factor. But if you don't have the depth to survive a JPJ and Deshaun Elliott injury, you weren't a very good secondary to begin with, especially when Brandon Echols is not the problem in that secondary. It's not like the Seahawks were saying, that's the duck. That's the guy we're going at. That's the one we're going to pick on. No, they picked on Juan Thornhill with their play action. They exposed him a lot. I thought he got really greedy and, deceived with his eyes. The Elijah Arroyo screen off of hard boot play action was a really good example of that, where Peyton Wilson and Thornhill both bit super hard on the play fake. That's a credit to the play design, but it's also somebody's got to stay home. And it was Ramsey today. He's not one of the top 10, 15 corners in the NFL anymore. He's just not in that discussion flat out. I think he's going to have splash plays. I think he's going to, like the interception, he's going to guess right every once in a while, but physically he doesn't have it the same way. From the slot, he's a better option there because he's a better tackler. He's physical. But I think ideally his destiny is as a safety at this point in his career. And so you traded Minkah Fitzpatrick for another safety who is, you're tethered to for longer and you have similar concerns about as he ages and is older. That deal looks less exciting, less enticing now. Darius Slay, I just no notable lapses in coverage or anything today, but that's because the Seahawks got everything they wanted over the middle of the field against the cover 3, or when there was man, they just torched Jalen Ramsey. And now TJ Watt. Not seeing a whole lot of TJ Watt. It looks a lot like the end of last season where Watt was pretty quiet, pretty quiet. He made a couple plays late. The his first pressure he got at the end in the fourth quarter, he was swiping away just a reach block as the Seahawks tried to set up a screen. So ultimately, they're kind of inviting pressure there and he's just too fast. He's going to beat that stuff. It's anytime anyone leaves him unblocked on the backside in the run game, he just closes down the line of scrimmage so fast. That's why he's still an elite run defender. Like, this is not a TJ Watt is bad conversation. He's still one of the best run defending edges in the NFL, and he shows flashes as a pass rusher. But again, that's the problem with being one of the oldest teams in the NFL. You have a lot of guys who are on the wrong side of 30 who still show flashes. Jalen Ramsey, TJ Watt, Cam Hayward, Aaron Rodgers. For moments, they still have it. It's there. But it's not consistent. And you need Watt to be a very consistent disruptor for this defensive line to work. Also, you need Herbig and Highsmith healthy at the same time. It feels like that is a consistent problem with those two guys going back to last season, opposite of TJ Watt. So I will grant that. But even moving around some and on some of the stunts and the twists and different games that the Steelers were playing on along the defensive line, which I like, Watt still wasn't really taking advantage of them. The offensive line for the Seahawks got really leaky once their center went down with an injury late and Olu Oluwatimi had to come in. That's, a different center helping to set protections. Likely, I'm sure Darnold handles a lot of that as a veteran quarterback, but still his first year there. You want to have your starting center out there. Things got really leaky and the Steelers brought a ton of pressure. So there are going to be those coverage or those protection lapses. And on the very next play, after that first Watt pressure, he beat Abe Lucas on that right side with just speed, just a really impressive speed rush, and bent with some bend and got around the corner and forced Darnold to get the ball out really quickly on third down. And it forced a fourth down. Great play. Wasn't a sack. That's the value of pressures, right? Steelers fans constantly yell about Myles Garrett racks up pressures. Where are his sack numbers? You saw the value of a pressure right there. But it's just not consistent enough. Through 2 weeks, last week, Armon Membu swallowed him up. That's a top 10 pick, but that's a rookie playing his first ever NFL game at right tackle. Swallowed Watt up for the most part. And this week, it wasn't a great bounce back performance. I worry about how this team is aging. I worry about the fragile construction of it. I worry that there are going to be more injuries because you just invite that when you have older players who are inherently less durable. And I worry that the Steelers have a bottom half. I won't say bottom 10 yet. I want to. Trust me, I want to, because this defense has looked as bad as any defense in the NFL through 2 weeks. I want to say it's a bottom 10 defense and stamp that. I can't go that far yet. So I'll say right now it looks like certainly a bottom half defense in the NFL. And again, a 41-year-old Aaron Rodgers led offense cannot carry a bottom half defense to the playoffs. There's no chance. Unless it's loaded with weapons, Jamar Chase and, Justin Jefferson and whoever. Insert elite running back of your choice and elite wide receivers of your choice and elite offensive line of your choice. And that's not the case with the Steelers. So I think it's time now to flip over to the offensive side of the ball. And a good comment in the chat from John. Again, bringing it. A loyal listener. Really appreciate it. The Steelers don't fill their Gatorade coolers with water, with fountain of youth water. Whew. Tough time reading on that one, but a good joke in the chat, and really appreciate everyone in the chat today. Drop questions, comments, anything, players you want me to talk about, their performance, thoughts you have. I love the interaction in the chat, and these instant reaction shows. It's one of my favorite parts of it, being able to get your thoughts, because as Nice Tokes says, this is a brutal L, and it really was. This team is not nearly as good as many thought going in. I still predicted 9 wins. I think that's possible because of Mike Tomlin voodoo magic, and I'm never going to count out Mike Tomlin voodoo magic, but I am going to say it doesn't look like a very well coached defense. And there are a lot of issues. It feels like the late Ben teams, the 2020 team and the 2021 team, felt very much like a house of cards, because you had this aging quarterback who could show it for flashes and, had the wherewithal to lead some game-winning drives, and you had a great kicker, and you had a defense that could do enough, that wasn't great, but could do enough in a pinch. And it felt very much like a house of cards. And ultimately that tumbled, with the playoff loss to Cleveland and other losses down the stretch of the end of Ben's career. This feels similar, a similar house of cards situation where you have a porous defense and an offense predicated on yards after the catch and quick completions short of the sticks and players breaking tackles, and Jaylen Warren's doing that. But there weren't many others doing that today, because you're just not going to consistently get that in the NFL, especially against a Mike McDonald coach defense. They're going to tackle well. They're going to have disguises, and they're going to be aggressive if they know you can't push the ball vertically. And it looks like the Steelers absolutely cannot threaten teams vertically unless that team is employing Brandon Stevens at cornerback. And Calvin Austin got him a couple times last week. But Brandon Stevens is one of the worst cornerbacks in the NFL. And even without Devin Witherspoon today, the Seahawks don't have a Brandon Stevens out there. Darion Kendrick was fine. There was the dropped interception. That was a terrible throw from Rodgers, so he should have had even another turnover. This team feels like a house of cards that's coming down early. Again, that is a bold proclamation early in the season when this team's 1-1 with a lot in front of it. But I had major concerns last week, and now heading to Foxborough next week for a matchup with the Patriots, a well-coached team with Mike Vrabel and Drake May that I believe got a win against Miami today. As I try to sift through the scores, that game's still going on, actually, but up 33-27 with the ball against Miami right now. I think the Steelers are absolutely in the class with those types of teams. The Patriots lost to the Raiders last week. The Dolphins got trounced by the Colts. I don't think a matchup with either of those teams would be a walkover for the Steelers. I don't know that there's a team in the NFL that the Steelers can just pound. They didn't pound the Jets. Buffalo did, because Buffalo is a legitimate AFC contender. So I have really big concerns. And I said that a lot last week. A lot of those bared out. So it felt nice to maybe be right about my prognostication while everyone was saying, Rodgers, that veteran savvy, getting it done. The old gunslinger, he's back, 4 touchdowns. Hold your horses. And I think we saw that today. Diving a little deeper into the offensive performance, I just have to start with Rodgers. I want to do a little weekly Rodgers report. We just have to. I think it was pretty ugly today. And we'll take a look at the numbers. 18 for 33 with a touchdown and 2 interceptions. Should have been 3 interceptions. Kendrick dropped the one that was thrown right at his face mask. But maybe also 2 makes sense because Calvin Austin kind of misplayed that throw that was for Pat Freiermuth in the back of the end zone. Though even if Austin didn't tip it to, I believe it was Kendrick that ultimately came down with that interception. I don't think it was a very good throw in the back corner of the end zone. And I think we talk about Rodgers. We continue to and I'll highlight TJ Black in the chat. We need to trade for left tackle now. There are a lot more problems than just the left tackle, but I agree that left tackle is a problem. I don't think trading for one is the right. We can't keep band-aiding this thing. Eventually, it's got to be a rebuild. But to Rodgers, I think we saw way less of the play action stuff, way less of the Arthur Smith stuff. I think I even gave Rodgers credit last week for acquiescing a bit more to the bootleg play action, to the, outside under center run game. A lot of the run game today was from the shotgun. That's what Rodgers wants. There were a lot of empty sets today. That's what Rodgers wants. He doesn't want pre-snap motion. He doesn't want turn those back to the defense play action. Does this sound familiar? This is exactly how Ben wanted to play at the end of his career. This is what old aging quarterbacks want. They want a static picture. They want to pick their matchups. They want to get the ball out of their hand quickly. And that can work for a little bit, but it's not a sustainable offensive philosophy, especially because that aging quarterback doesn't have the arm, doesn't have the mobility that they did years prior. I think around the goal line on that interception, that was an empty set. Spread out really wide. I think we saw that a lot more today. It looked a lot more like the Aaron Rodgers offense today. And it worked a lot more like the Aaron Rodgers offense worked in New York last season, because while some of the numbers were nice, that there was a nice touchdown to interception ratio, his time to throw was the lowest of his career. His average depth of target was the lowest of his career. I'll be interested to see what those numbers are coming out of this one. And if you want to hear even more of a deep dive into some of the numbers and tendencies and things, come back tomorrow. Make sure you like and subscribe. Like this episode, subscribe to the Still Curtain podcast, and I'll be with you at 1:30 p.m. live tomorrow on the same YouTube page. And then it'll go up everywhere else as a podcast as well after that. So we can dive into some of those numbers more. But anecdotally, just after watching that, right, first dry run through, this is an instant reaction. It was a lot of that stuff. It was a lot of the Rodgers stuff. It didn't threaten the defense vertically at all. I thought Mike McDonald, a lot of this game, played a lot of press coverage and dared the Steelers to beat him deep. And to the point, which is why I highlighted it in the chat, Rodgers wants to get the ball out quickly because he doesn't want to get hit, because he knows he can't create outside of the pocket. Though he did have a couple decent throws outside of the pocket today. I saw more flashes actually this week than last week, but there was more bad overall. He also knows he doesn't have great protection. Troy Fautanu was not good today. Broderick Jones was less abhorrently bad, but he's not a very good left tackle and will continue to struggle throughout the season. Though through his first 2 years, he does tend to become less of an issue as the season goes on. So there's still some hope for that becoming less of a problem. But I think long-term, ultimately, he's not the answer. Fautanu didn't look great, had a big holding call late on a ball that Rodgers just absolutely sprayed, trying to make an off-target throw once he did get out of the pocket. He can't generate the horsepower that he needs when he doesn't have a good base, a good throwing base. I think that's impossible to ignore. And again, I keep saying it, that's what made Rodgers great. And without it, he's the 17th, 19th, 20th best quarterback in the NFL. Like right now, I would probably put him a little lower than that because I'm not very high on his pre-snap stuff, his cadence. Yeah, he got Uchenna Nwosu today for a free play when he ultimately completed it to DK Metcalf, who we need to talk about as well. But I don't think he's some commander-in-chief at the line of scrimmage, getting the protection set perfectly and always into the perfect play. I don't feel that way about him. I don't feel that he's somebody who can dice teams up from the pocket or has ever truly, truly been that, like at his absolute best. Yeah, of course, he could do pretty much anything. But he still preferred to hit his explosives outside of the pocket. And if you're not accessing that part of the passing game because you can't move, you can't really climb the pocket. He did it a couple times today, but every time it's like, go, 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 go. It's like cheering on a 3-year-old at soccer practice who you don't know if he's going to just fall over every time he runs. It's right there. Go, go, go. He just can't move. And you can't build an offense like that. The scramble on 3rd and 5 in the fourth quarter. He had an angle. 28 other quarterbacks in the NFL, maybe more. That's a first down. Not Joe Flacco. Maybe not Tua. I'm running out of names pretty quick. So maybe it's 30 others. You lose so many extra possessions. You can't keep the chains moving. And you can't, there are 2 big problems with Rodgers right now. He can't threaten defenses vertically because he doesn't trust his protection, and he doesn't have the ability to get outside the pocket and make those off-platform throws consistently anymore. So teams can be aggressive at the line of scrimmage with a lot of press coverage. Teams can bring extra blitzers and extra pressure. They don't need to play too high shell safety stuff. But then when they do play, drop into zone and play coverage, especially late in the game, he can't burn them for it because he can't scramble. That's why Mahomes and Burrow and Lamar and Josh Allen, they're all mobile quarterbacks. Different types, but they all can burn teams. And some of their most valuable plays are with their legs. That's why Jordan Love has looked so much better this year. One of the reasons. He's healthy and he's running again. You buy yourself extra possessions. That's why I'm high on Jalen Hurts. He buys himself extra possessions to take shots down the field. Now, even the, extra set of downs that Rodgers is going to get out of it, if he could, it's not like he's going to take those shots. We certainly didn't see it today. But it would be valuable to have a chance. Have a chance that Jonnu Smith breaks 3 tackles or Jaylen Warren can make a big play. Again, he was incredible today. I don't have much faith that this offense has counterpunches. What would it be? What would it be other than we run it down your throat? And if you're not going to do that to the Seahawks, which generally speaking, the Mike McDonald defense is a lot of different things. It's simulated pressures, but the ethos of it is we're going to play a lot of defensive backs and be in coverage. And if you can run it down our throat, you can beat us. Do it. And so it really couldn't. There were some flashes, but their run game, what they want to do in the Arthur Smith run game, the outside zone stuff, they barely got to any of that because they have to run everything out of shotgun. And then Rodgers wants so much control at the line of scrimmage that you can't even put Caleb Johnson on the field. And yes, disastrous day on special teams. We haven't seen him as a runner at all because Rodgers doesn't trust him in protection. So we get Kenneth Gainwell out there for half of the snaps. And Gainwell, let's take a look at the numbers. Through 2 games, today, 5 carries for 20 yards, 4 yards a pop along of 13. All right, not bad. For the season, he now has 6 carries. He was last week charted with 1 carry or that can't be, 7 carries for 19 yards. My apologies, trying to do this live. 7 carries for 19 yards last week, 2.7 yards per carry. It was better this week. He has no pop. There's no threat of an explosive play. You're just not beating teams that way. You're not running them out of those shell looks. Or You're not running them out of their exotic blitz stuff, right? You're not doing your offensive line any favors because, yeah, we can run stunts. Yeah, we can run a NASCAR package with 3 edge rushers out there. Yeah, we can get weird with this because you're not going to run us out of it. So what's the counterpunch? And if all that running game is coming out of shotgun, it's even further limited. You can't build a run game out of shotgun unless you have an elite interior offensive line. That's why the Chiefs invested so heavily there, because they want to run the ball out of shotgun. And you have to do a ton in the RPO game, right? Mahomes is not a zone read runner or anything like that, but the Eagles can run the ball out of shotgun because they have the threat of the 11-man running game. Somebody has to account for Jalen Hurts. The Chiefs can do it because they invested in that type of personnel, have an elite interior offensive line. And even last year, they didn't do it very well. But they've historically been able to do it because there's also the threat of Mahomes beating you over the top and making the right decisions in the RPO game. I don't think you can build a run game this way in the modern NFL, running like a ton of inside zone out of shotgun. I have no faith it's going to happen. So unless you get Rodgers to go back under center and get Caleb Johnson on the field and say, all right, kid, let's see what you got, make up for that mistake, I don't see this offense figuring it out. I really don't. And then you add on top of that, DK Metcalf has a good case of their drops and is predictably being bracketed on every downfield route he runs. So even when Rodgers would consider throwing it deep, Metcalf has 2 defenders there. There's always safety help over the top. There's just nothing to pull the safeties down to the line of scrimmage to either stop the run or elsewhere in the formation. Even if you run a 4-by-1, like you go empty, 4-by-1, you put Freiermuth, Jonnu Smith, Calvin Austin, and Jalen Warren to the other side and leave DK Metcalf isolated on the backside, you're still probably going to shade safety help DK's way and probably not going to get burned for it. So that's the issue with not having a true wide receiver 2 that you trust on a down-to-down basis. And then you're not accessing different stuff in the passing game because your quarterback wants the ball out of his hands in 2.4 seconds. It's bleak. It's really, really bleak to me. Again, I really impressed with Warren. 14 for 48, 3.4 yards on the ground. Like, that's not great, but I thought he got pretty much everything that was there for him. Johnson with 1 carry for 1 yard. And Jalen Warren led the way in the passing game with 4 catches for 86 yards. And my preseason prediction of Jonnu Smith's going to lead this team in receptions, still looking pretty good after 2 weeks. He equaled Warren with 4 catches of his own for 27 yards on the season. Jonnu Smith is averaging, there's no way that's right, 3 yards per reception. Yeah. Yep. 3 yards per reception. That's not great. If your entire passing game is predicated on yards after the catch and you don't have guys getting yards after the catch, you're in a bad spot. Elsewhere, I don't, again, to DK, Mark Sanchez said, you just got to get the ball in his hands however you can. He's a run after the catch type of player. No, he's not. That's never been. DK is a go up and get it guy. Like, he's a vertical stretch guy. He's a deep overs. He's a run away from you down the field. I don't think he's the best contested catch receiver despite his size. I don't think he has the body control to win super consistently, but he did in the end zone today. And he did on that free play when the Steelers got 9 yards out of it and Rodgers just kind of threw it up to him. And then to the coaching, as I try to empty out the notebook here, minute 50. And again, if you have anything in the chat, I'd love to hear it. You punt. Let me get the specific numbers on it because I thought it was a terrible decision at the end of the third quarter. You punt from your own 48-yard line, 4th and 1, a minute 41 remaining, tied 14-14. And after that, everything unraveled. So it's easy to say, like, that was a bad decision because then the Seahawks drove down 10 plays, 55 yards for a field goal and then scored a touchdown on the ensuing kickoff. So, like, it got away pretty quick after that. So it's easy to say that was a bad decision in hindsight, but in the moment, I hated it. Your defense couldn't get a stop all day. It hasn't gotten a stop all year. What made you think just because you were trying to pin them deep, they're not going to march down the field and put points on the board? You got to score more than 14 points. One of your touchdowns came off a short field on a turnover, and maybe that's what you're banking on again. But if your identity is this multiple tight end, physical wide receiver look, you want to be able to run the ball, get a yard. Get a yard. You're going to surrender points probably anyways because, yes, Seattle had stalled out for a while after their opening drive touchdown, but that was just Darnold mistakes. They could get whatever they wanted when he wasn't just making mistakes. And then I thought he played really well in the second half. And on the play to ice the game, when he spun out of pressure and flipped it to A.J. Barner against the blitz, that is stuff Rodgers flat out cannot do. And that's so valuable. Just being able to move and escape at all. That was stuff Kenny Pickett couldn't do either. Not to poke at old wounds, but Pickett wasn't athletic enough to do that stuff, and it got him into trouble. Rodgers was athletic enough to do it, is not now, and you see the same thing. Anytime he tries to climb, move, anything, bail from the pocket, it's a freaking adventure, man. It's such an adventure, and I don't have a good feeling about it ever. In the first half, that one deep ball that ultimately came back on a penalty, I forget what the penalty was, but Freiermuth didn't catch it. It was a defensive penalty, actually. There was a defensive hold in the secondary on Calvin Austin, which is ultimately, I think, where Rodgers wanted to go with the ball on that play. He was rolling to his right and threw just this bomb to Freiermuth because I think he knew he had a free play. That was a serious throw. Like, that was a pretty old school Rodgers throw, and Freiermuth didn't haul it in. He should have. And that, my ears perked up a little bit. Like, is the old gunslinger still got one last fight in him? But after that, there just wasn't a whole lot more of it. And again, they're going to be flashes. Sure. Of course there are. A lot of players can show flashes of who they once were till they're 43, right? Very few can consistently be as great as they were a decade prior. And that goes for Rodgers, but it goes for Ramsey. It goes for Watt. It goes for Hayward. It goes for all the aging players on this roster. And the notion that this was an all-in season was never true. I said it sometimes because I didn't find a better... I ultimately backtracked from when I said it, but I uttered it at one point in the offseason. But I didn't find a better way to, like, middle it. It's not all in. The Steelers are going to probably have 12 draft picks next year based on comp picks, and maybe they trade for more. They traded away George Pickens to get a third-round pick next year. It looks like they're just loading up to draft a quarterback early, and I think that's absolutely the right decision to do. So this was never an all-in year, but it was a year that you took some pretty big swings. It was a year that you overhauled a lot of stuff. The wide receiver room, made sweeping changes in the defensive secondary. We still haven't seen Derek Harmon, so fair enough, but you drafted Caleb Johnson and let Najee Harris go to change over the running back room, which hasn't happened because we haven't seen Caleb Johnson. Again, aside from special teams. And it looks the same. It looks the same. And I'm always going to bring that back to you can't fire the whole team, but you can fire the coach. I'm not going to get on here every week. Well, actually, I'm not going to make that promise. But I'm probably not going to get on here every week and say that the Steelers just need to fire Mike Tomlin, and that's just all I'm going to do. Beat that to death. But the Steelers need to fire Mike Tomlin. It's done. Just like these old players are done, the coach is done too. And I don't see any path forward. I don't see a world where Tomlin's the right guy to develop the next quarterback, where Tomlin can get them out of this mess. Even just on the defensive side of the ball. Like, put the offense completely aside. He's not an offensive-minded head coach. That's Arthur Smith and Aaron Rodgers' problem to solve that I don't think they have any solutions for. I don't think any coaching staff really, Kyle Shanahan would cobble something together, and so would Sean McVay. But I don't think many coaching staffs in the NFL would have, actual sustainable solutions for what ails the Steelers. But defensively, I don't see him solving this. I don't see it getting better. And those guys aren't getting any younger. So I think, again, Mike Tomlin voodoo magic notwithstanding, I think there's a chance the wheels maybe fall off a little bit. I'll predict now, if I can have a mulligan on my prediction, my preseason record prediction, I would drop it to 8 wins. I wouldn't do anything crazy. I don't think this team is going to completely bottom out because Tomlin just doesn't let that happen. I don't know. It's just something about it's something about the Steelers. But I think this team is cooked, especially if they continue to play that way on the defensive side of the ball. Sean Ireland in the chat. It's week 2, and I don't even see Bears fans overreacting like this. First of all, you're not looking hard enough. They absolutely are. Second of all, I don't think I'm overreacting because I said a lot of the same stuff last week. I saw very similar performances both weeks. It's the same team. The same team that barely beat the Jets is the same team that lost to the Seahawks. It's a team that's very limited on offense and has an aging defense that can't stop the run and stubbornly plays the same stuff in the secondary, and it's the same old tricks, and everyone knows how to solve them. And it's been the same. It's not just even this to start this season. It was the end of last year. It's been since 2020 where it's been the same old story. I know this team will cobble together some wins. I never had any actual expectations that it could win a playoff game. I'm so certain that it can't now through 2 weeks. And I think it could be a long and frustrating year. That's my take coming out of week 2. If you want to continue to hear from me through that long and frustrating year, and as John said, we're realists here. Maybe I'm even a little bit of a pessimist, but Tommy and Shane on the Wednesday show, certainly realists. They're going to give it to you straight about what the state of the Steelers. And if you'd love more of that throughout the season, please consider subscribing to the Still Curtain podcast. We really appreciate your support. And I appreciate the support of everyone at FanSided who gets us live everywhere you can get your podcasts. Thanks so much. I'll talk to everyone tomorrow at 1:30 for a deeper dive into this game and maybe even just some farther reaching Rodgers talk. I know there was a lot of Rodgers talk today. How can you not? So we'll get into some different topics tomorrow. I'll have some numbers that I've been able to dig up, much like last week. And that show is a lot of fun as well. So come and join me for it. That's going to do it. until tomorrow, have a good one. And as always, go Steelers.